I never imagined that saying yes to one stupid favor would completely change my life. If you had told me 6 months ago that I'd willingly stand on a stage in front of hundreds of strangers, I would have laughed in your face. I couldn't even give presentations at work without my hands shaking. My heart raced if more than 5 people looked at me at once. Yet somehow, there I was standing outside the old Maple Street Community Theater, with sweaty palms and a knot in my stomach so tight I thought I might actually throw up. The banner hanging above the entrance read, "Auditions tonight." I stared at it for a full minute. "This is a mistake," I muttered. I had absolutely no business being there. The only reason I'd signed up was because my coworker had backed out of volunteering at the last minute, leaving the theater short on people. They didn't even need experienced actors, just enough bodies to fill the cast of a small town comedy. "You'll barely have any lines," she'd promised. "Then why can't someone else do it?" "Because everyone else already said no." Apparently, I was everyone else's backup plan. I almost turned around 3 separate times before I finally opened the front door. The lobby smelled like old wood, fresh paint, and coffee. Posters from decades of productions covered the walls. People laughed somewhere deeper inside the building. Everyone looked so comfortable. Groups chatted while reading scripts. Others stretched or practiced lines. I immediately felt like I didn't belong. A woman with gray curls looked up from a folding table. "You must be Franklin." I blinked. Yeah." She smiled warmly. "I'm Diane, the director. Glad you came." "I'm honestly surprised I came too." She laughed. "I've heard that one before." She handed me a name tag and a script. "Don't worry. This isn't Broadway. We're just trying to tell a good story and have fun." Easy for her to say. My legs already felt weak. I stuck the name tag onto my shirt and stepped farther inside. That's when I noticed him. He was standing on stage helping someone adjust a backdrop. Tall, dark blonde hair rolled back beneath a baseball cap. A faded blue t-shirt with paint stains. Jeans that had clearly seen better days. He wasn't trying to stand out. In fact, he looked more focused on fixing a loose piece of scenery than talking to anyone. Then someone called his name. "Blake." He looked over his shoulder. "Can you give me a hand over here?" "Yeah." His voice carried across the room, calm and relaxed. He climbed down from the ladder with practiced ease, smiling at the volunteer who'd called him over. There was something easy about him, like he belonged there, unlike me. First time, I nearly jumped. A younger guy had appeared beside me holding 2 cups of coffee. "Is it that obvious?" "You've been staring at the exit for the last 5 minutes." "I've been considering using it." He laughed. "Don't. You'll regret it." "I doubt that. I said the same thing 3 years ago." He handed me one of the coffees. "I'm Owen." "Franklin. Nice to meet you." Before I could answer, Diane clapped her hands loudly. "Everyone, circle up." About 20 of us gathered near the front of the stage. I stood near the back, hoping to disappear. No such luck. "We have several new faces tonight," Diane said. "Let's introduce ourselves." My stomach dropped. Of course. Introductions. One by one, people said their names and why they joined. "I've done theater since high school. I wanted to try something different. My wife made me." Laughter filled the room. Then it reached me. "I'm Franklin." Silence. Every eye turned toward me. My throat tightened immediately. I... Nothing. The words refused to come. Heat climbed into my face. Someone smiled encouragingly. Someone else waited patiently. But all I could hear was my heartbeat. "I'm sorry." I looked down. I really hate speaking in front of people. The room stayed quiet. Not awkward. Just understanding. Diane nodded gently. "Thank you for saying it anyway." I let out a shaky breath. Then another voice spoke. "It gets easier." I looked up. Blake, he was standing across the circle with his hands in his pockets. He wasn't smiling in a teasing way. He looked sincere. "I used to freeze too," he said. "You did?" He shrugged. First rehearsal, I couldn't even say my own name without stuttering. A few people laughed knowingly. Really? I asked. Really? For some reason, I believed him. The tightness in my chest eased just enough for me to breathe normally again. After introductions, we started reading scenes aloud. I prayed I wouldn't be chosen. Naturally. I was. Franklin, Diane said, you'll read with Blake. Of course I would. I climbed onto the stage, feeling like I was walking toward my own execution. Blake stepped beside me, script folded in one hand. Up close, he looked older than I'd first thought, maybe 30. Calm blue eyes, a few freckles across his nose. You okay? He asked quietly. Not even close. He smiled. Good. I frowned. Good? Means you're taking it seriously. I think it means I'm about to embarrass myself. You won't. You sound awfully confident. I've watched hundreds of first rehearsals. And? They all think they're the worst one in the room. I laughed, despite myself. See? What? You're already doing better. Diane called for quiet. We opened our scripts. My hands trembled. The first line belonged to Blake. He delivered it naturally, making everyone laugh exactly where the joke landed. Then it was my turn. I looked down, opened my mouth, and nothing came out. Again. The silence stretched. My face burned. I wanted to disappear. Before panic completely took over, Blake leaned slightly closer so only I could hear him. Forget everyone else. I glanced at him. Just talk to me. For the first time that evening, I thought maybe I could. Blake kept looking at me like we were the only two people in the room. It sounded ridiculous, but it worked. The theater disappeared. The audience disappeared. The dozen cast members watching us disappeared. All I had to do was answer him. I swallowed. Then I read my line. Quietly. A little shaky. But I read it. There you go, Blake said without breaking character. The tiny encouragement wasn't even part of the script, but somehow it made the next sentence easier. Then the next. By the end of the scene, I was still nervous, but I wasn't frozen anymore. When Diane called for a break, I stepped off the stage and immediately let out a long breath. I survived. Barely, Owen joked as he walked past with another cup of coffee. I thought I was going to pass out. You looked better than half the people who audition here. I'm choosing to believe you're lying. I am. I laughed. You'll fit in just fine. The rest of rehearsal moved quickly. Some people sang. Others worked on choreography. A few volunteers painted props in the corner. I was surprised by how many people treated this place like a second home. Nobody seemed interested in showing off. If someone forgot a line, everyone helped. If a joke didn't land, they'd rewrite it together. It wasn't competitive. It felt safe. That wasn't what I'd expected. While everyone gathered around a table of snacks, I wandered backstage. The old curtains smelled faintly of dust. Stacks of fake furniture filled one wall. Boxes labeled Pirates, Christmas Carol, and Wizard costumes were piled nearly to the ceiling. You'll get lost back here. I turned. Blake stood in the doorway holding 2 bottles of water. I was just looking. He handed me one. Thanks. He leaned against a nearby workbench. So, you came back after almost running away. I almost didn't. But you did. I think panic just carried me through the front door. He laughed. I've seen that before. You really had stage fright too? Worse. I raised an eyebrow. I threw up before my first performance. I stared. Seriously? Oh yeah. You don't seem like someone who gets nervous. I still do. That surprised me. You looked completely relaxed out there. He shrugged. I've learned how to fake it. There was something reassuring about hearing that. Like confidence wasn't something people were born with. Maybe it was just something they practiced. So why theater? I asked. He looked around the backstage area. My parents met here. Really? My mom acted. My dad built sets. He smiled to himself. I practically grew up running around backstage. That's kind of perfect. It felt normal. He glanced back at me. What about you? My coworker tricked me. He laughed. I believe that. I was promised almost no lines. Never trust directors. I've already learned that. We stood there for another minute, listening to hammers tapping somewhere in the workshop. It wasn't awkward, just quiet, comfortable. Eventually, Diane called everyone back. Places. Over the next 2 weeks, rehearsals became part of my routine. Every Tuesday, every Thursday, Saturday afternoons. I still got nervous. My palms still sweated before every scene. But something slowly changed. I started recognizing people, learning names, remembering inside jokes. The theater stopped feeling like a building. It started feeling like a community. And without realizing it, I found myself looking for Blake every time I walked in. Sometimes he'd already be hanging lights. Sometimes he'd be fixing a prop. Sometimes he'd be helping someone rehearse. He always seemed busy, yet somehow he always found time to ask me the same question. You doing okay today? The answer wasn't always yes. Some days work had been exhausting. Some days my anxiety was worse. Some days I barely wanted to leave my apartment. But talking to him somehow made those days easier. One Thursday evening, rehearsal ended later than usual. Rain hammered the roof as everyone packed up. I didn't bring an umbrella, Owen groaned. I've got one, someone answered. People slowly disappeared into the parking lot. I stood near the entrance watching the rain. Great. My car wasn't parked close. You planning on waiting until tomorrow? Blake appeared beside me. I might. He looked outside. I parked near the front. Lucky. You can borrow my umbrella. I'll give it back next week. He shook his head. I'm using it too. Oh. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he smiled. Unless you'd rather get soaked. I laughed. I guess sharing an umbrella isn't the worst thing. Good. He opened it. The rain was heavier than I'd realized. We stepped outside together. The umbrella wasn't exactly made for two people. Our shoulders bumped almost immediately. Sorry. My fault. We adjusted, then bumped into each other again. This thing is tiny, I said. I know. You'd think theaters could afford better umbrellas. We spent the budget on fake windows. Reasonable. He smiled. We crossed the parking lot slowly, trying to avoid puddles. The rain drowned out almost every other sound. It was strangely peaceful. So, Blake said, how's the stage fright? I considered it. It's still there, but I'm starting to think it doesn't get to make all my decisions anymore. He looked at me, not just glanced. Really looked, then he smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. My car came into view. I stopped beside the driver's door. Thanks. For? The umbrella? The encouragement? The not letting me quit? He shrugged. You did the hard part. I unlocked my car. Before getting in, I looked back. You know? What? I don't think I've ever met someone this patient. He laughed softly. Don't spread rumors. I might. He shook his head, still smiling. See you Tuesday, Franklin. See you Tuesday. As I drove home through the rain, I realized something that should have worried me. I wasn't looking forward to the next rehearsal because of the play anymore. I was looking forward to seeing Blake. By the time opening night was a month away, the theater had started feeling less like a place I visited and more like somewhere I belonged. That realization caught me completely off guard. If someone had asked me to describe my week, I'd mention work, grocery shopping, maybe calling my mom on Sundays. Now I'd also say, I've got rehearsal tonight. And somehow, that had become the part I looked forward to most. Not because I suddenly loved being on stage. I still got butterflies every single time Diane called. Places, but the fear wasn't as loud anymore. It had competition, laughter backstage, people teasing each other over forgotten lines. Owen bringing way too many donuts every Saturday morning. And Blake, especially Blake. One evening, Diane gathered everyone after rehearsal. Quick announcement, she said. This Saturday we're having a volunteer day. Costumes need organizing. The lobby needs cleaning. And the new set pieces aren't going to build themselves. A few people groaned dramatically. I'll buy pizza, Diane added. Suddenly, everyone volunteered. I knew food would work, she laughed. Blake glanced at me. You coming? I wasn't planning to. You should. I've never built a set before. You don't have to. So what would I do? He smiled. I'll find something. Saturday morning arrived much earlier than I would have liked. I walked into the theater wearing old jeans and a faded hoodie, expecting organized chaos. Instead, it looked like someone had shaken the entire building upside down. Paint cans, lumber, costume racks, extension cords, people carrying fake doors across the stage. Morning, Blake waved from halfway up a ladder. You made it. I was promised pizza. You'll earn it. I had a feeling you'd say that. He climbed down and handed me a pair of work gloves. Ever used a drill? I've successfully hung one picture frame. We're starting you with sandpaper. Probably smart. For the next couple of hours, I helped smooth pieces of wood while Blake and a few others assembled part of the living room set. Every so often, he'd glance over. You still alive? Barely. Need a break? My arms are filing for divorce. He laughed. I'll put you on easier duty. What could possibly be easier than sanding? He pointed toward the costume room. Alphabetizing. I sighed dramatically. I've peaked. Around lunchtime, everyone gathered in the lobby with pizza boxes spread across two folding tables. I sat beside Owen. Blake ended up across from me. Conversation bounced between favorite movies, embarrassing rehearsal stories, and local gossip. Then Diane spoke up. Blake? He looked up from his slice. Franklin tells me you've been coaching him. I nearly choked on my drink. I didn't say coaching. You absolutely did. Blake looked at me with obvious amusement. I've just been answering questions. You're selling yourself short, Diane said. I've watched Franklin improve every week. Everyone turned toward me. Normally, that would have made me panic. Instead, I smiled. Thanks. Blake nodded once. You've done the work. It was such a simple sentence, but hearing him say it felt different, more personal somehow. Later that afternoon, we finished organizing props. As people started heading home, I carried a box toward the storage room. Halfway there, one of the handles ripped. The entire box crashed onto the floor. Plastic dishes, books, picture frames, everything scattered everywhere. Oh no. I knelt immediately. So much for helping. A second pair of hands reached for one of the books. It happens. Blake. I made a mess. You dropped a box. Same thing, he smiled. I've accidentally knocked an entire wall over before. I stared. A wall? It wasn't attached yet. That makes me feel slightly better. Together we gathered everything back into another box. Our hands reached for the same picture frame at the exact same time. We both stopped. Sorry, I said. You first. No, go ahead, he laughed. We're really doing this? Apparently. He picked it up and handed it to me instead. There. Problem solved. For a brief second, our fingers brushed. It wasn't intentional. Barely even noticeable. Still, I found myself thinking about it far longer than I should have. The next rehearsal focused almost entirely on running the first act without stopping. Everything went surprisingly well, until my biggest scene. Halfway through one of my speeches, my mind went completely blank. Every word disappeared. I stared at Blake. He stared back. The silence stretched. Old panic rushed into my chest. Not again. Please, not again. Before I could completely unravel, Blake stayed perfectly in character. He changed one of his lines, just enough to remind me where we were. The missing sentence came rushing back. I finished the scene. When Diane called for notes afterward, she smiled. Nice recovery. I blinked. Recovery. I thought that was planned, Owen admitted. Several people nodded. Only Blake knew what had actually happened. As everyone packed up later that night, I caught him near the prop table. You saved me? He shook his head. We're scene partners. Still, you would have found your way back. I don't know about that. I do. There it was again. That quiet confidence he always seemed to have in me, sometimes more than I had in myself. As we walked toward the parking lot together, the evening air was cool enough to make me zip up my jacket. You know, Blake said, there's a little diner a few blocks away. Okay. I usually stop there after late rehearsals. I looked at him. You asking me to join you? If you're not busy, because I wasn't, not even close. But for some reason, answering felt strangely important. I'd like that. His smile was small, real, good. 20 minutes later, we were sitting across from each other in a nearly empty diner, sharing fries and talking about everything except theater, work, music, favorite childhood movies, terrible cooking attempts. I learned that Blake had been an elementary school art teacher before switching careers to graphic design. He learned I collected old vinyl records, even though I didn't own a particularly good record player. You know, he said, laughing, that's the most Franklin hobby I've ever heard. What does that mean? It means I'm not surprised. I'm choosing to take that as a compliment. It is. The waitress eventually brought the check. Before I could reach for it, Blake picked it up. My turn. You don't have to. I invited you. Then next time is mine. The words slipped out before I thought about them. Next time. Blake noticed. His smile softened. I'd like a next time. So would I. More than I was ready to admit. After the diner, something shifted. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just enough that I noticed it. Blake and I stopped saying goodbye at the theater doors. Instead, we'd end up talking in the parking lot for another 20 minutes. Sometimes about rehearsal, sometimes about absolutely nothing. One night we spent 15 minutes debating whether pineapple belonged on pizza. I can't believe you're against it, I said. I'm against fruit pretending to be a topping. It's sweet and salty. It's a crime. I didn't realize I was friends with such a food snob. He grinned. I have standards. Clearly. It was ridiculous. And somehow those conversations became my favorite part of the week. 3 weeks before opening night, Diane made another announcement. Next Saturday, we're holding an open rehearsal. A few people nodded. For family? Someone asked. And friends, Diane replied. It's a chance to perform in front of a small audience before opening night. My stomach immediately dropped. An audience. Real people. Watching. I felt all the progress I'd made disappear in an instant. After rehearsal ended, I sat alone in one of the empty rows of seats, staring at the stage. You've got that look again. I looked over. Blake. What look? The one that says you're thinking about running. I might. He sat down beside me. The theater was quiet now, the only sound coming from someone sweeping backstage. I thought I was getting better. You are. Then why does this feel just as terrifying as the first day? He rested his elbows on his knees. Because it's something new. I hate new. I know. I mean it. I know. For a minute, neither of us spoke. Then Blake asked quietly, Can I tell you something? Sure. I almost quit before my first show. I turned toward him. What stopped you? He smiled faintly. There was an older actor here named Walter. I've heard people mention him. He passed away a few years ago. Blake looked out at the empty stage. I told him I wasn't good enough. What did he say? He asked if I enjoyed being here. I waited. I told him yes. And? He said, then don't steal that joy from yourself just because you're afraid someone else might not understand it. The words settled somewhere deep inside me. I've never forgotten that. Neither would I. Open rehearsal arrived much faster than I wanted. About 40 people sat scattered throughout the audience. Parents, friends, neighbors, people I'd never met. I peeked through the curtain. Big mistake. I shouldn't have looked. Blake appeared beside me. No? There are actual humans out there. I noticed. What if I freeze? Then we'll keep going. What if I completely ruin the show? You won't. You sound very sure. I am. I laughed nervously. You know what's annoying? What? You're almost always right. I try. The stage manager called. Places. Everyone hurried into position. My pulse hammered so loudly I could barely hear anything else. The curtain opened. The first scene went well. The second, too. Then came mine. I walked on stage. The lights hit my face. For half a second, I couldn't see the audience anymore. Only bright white light. Then my eyes adjusted. Rows of people. Watching. Waiting. Fear slammed into me. I forgot my first line. No. Not again. Please. Across the stage, Blake caught my eye. He smiled. Not a big smile, just enough. The same one he'd given me on my first night. Just talk to me. I remembered. Not the exact words. The feeling. I took one slow breath, then another. And finally, the line came. Then the next. Then another. By the end of the scene, people laughed exactly where they were supposed to. When we exited backstage, I leaned against the wall. I did it. You did? I thought I was going to pass out. You didn't. I was close, Blake laughed. I know. Before I could stop myself, I threw my arms around him. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. Just a quick hug. The second I realized what I'd done, I stepped back. Oh. Heat rushed into my face. Sorry. Blake looked surprised, then he smiled. You don't have to apologize. I got carried away. I noticed. There was a strange pause between us. Not uncomfortable. Just different. Someone called Blake's name from the stage. I've got to go. Right. I'll see you after. Yeah. But the rest of rehearsal, I couldn't stop thinking about that hug, or the fact that neither of us had wanted to end it immediately. Later that evening, several cast members decided to celebrate the successful rehearsal at a nearby cafe. The tables were pushed together. Everyone talked over one another, laughed, shared stories. At one point, Owen leaned across the table. So, I looked up. So? You and Blake. Both of us answered at the same time. What about us? Owen smirked. Nothing. There is definitely a nothing that means something, Blake said. I'm just saying. Owen shrugged dramatically. You two spend an awful lot of time together. We're scene partners, I replied. And friends, Blake added. Exactly. Owen grinned. I'm just making observations. Several people rolled their eyes. Diane laughed. Leave them alone. Conversation moved on. But I noticed something. Neither Blake nor I looked at each other for the next couple of minutes, almost like we'd both been thinking the same thing. When we finally left the cafe, the streets were quiet. We walked toward our cars more slowly than usual. I hope Owen didn't make you uncomfortable, Blake said. He didn't. You sure? I nodded. He just likes teasing people. That's true. We reached the parking lot. Neither of us unlocked our cars. I've been meaning to ask you something, Blake said. What? He rubbed the back of his neck. After opening night? Yeah? Would you maybe want to keep hanging out? I blinked. You mean, even after the play ends? Yeah. The question shouldn't have made my heart race, but it did, because I'd been wondering the exact same thing. I smiled before I could hide it. I'd like that. Blake smiled too, a little wider this time. Good. For the first time since joining the theater, I realized I wasn't just afraid of failing on stage anymore. I was afraid of what it would mean if this ended. Because somewhere between rehearsals, shared umbrellas, late-night diners, and quiet conversations, Blake had become the best part of my week. Opening night was 5 days away. The entire theater felt different. Rehearsals were quieter before they started. Everyone seemed more focused. People checked props twice. Costumes were steamed and hung in perfect rows. Even Owen had stopped making jokes during scene changes. Almost. This is either going to be amazing, he announced one evening, or we'll accidentally burn the building down. Diane looked at him over the top of her glasses. Please don't even joke about that. I've been silenced. You've been warned. The room erupted in laughter, breaking some of the tension. I appreciated that, because my own nerves were steadily building again. Our final dress rehearsal was the closest thing we'd had to a real performance. Lights, costumes, sound effects, everything. I stood backstage wearing my character's jacket, staring at the curtain. You've been pacing. I looked over. Blake stood beside me, already in costume. I have? For about 10 minutes. I didn't even notice. I figured. He handed me a bottle of water. You forgot this. Thanks. I took a sip, trying to settle my breathing. What if tomorrow's worse? It probably will be. I frowned. That's supposed to help. It means what you're feeling is normal. I laughed. You always know what to say. No. He smiled. I just remember what I needed to hear. That stayed with me. Dress rehearsal went surprisingly well. There were a few missed cues. One prop fell over. Someone entered from the wrong side of the stage. Nothing disastrous. When the curtain closed for the final time, everyone applauded each other. Diane gathered us in a circle. I've directed more than 20 productions. She looked around at all of us. And every single opening night feels exactly the same. Nerve-wracking? Someone asked. She smiled. Exciting. She paused. Remember something. Everyone listened. The audience isn't coming here hoping you'll fail. She looked directly at me for a second before continuing. They're hoping you'll give them a reason to laugh, cry, and forget about the outside world for a couple of hours. I hadn't thought about it that way. Not once. Maybe I'd been seeing the audience as judges, when they were really just people who wanted to enjoy a story. The next afternoon, I couldn't focus on anything. Work was impossible. Emails blurred together. I checked the clock every few minutes. By 6 o'clock, I was already at the theater. Far too early. The parking lot was almost empty. Inside, Blake was adjusting a picture frame on the set. You know the show doesn't start for another 2 hours, right? I know. You've been here since... He checked his watch. 6? I couldn't sit at home. I understand. He climbed down from the stage. You want to help me with something? As long as it keeps me from thinking. Perfect. For the next hour, we walked through the theater, checking chairs, replacing batteries and flashlights, straightening programs in the lobby. Tiny jobs, none of them actually important, but they kept my hands busy, my mind quiet. About 30 minutes before the audience arrived, I stepped outside for some air. The sun had almost disappeared. A warm breeze moved through the trees lining the parking lot. The theater doors opened behind me. Blake joined me on the sidewalk. You disappeared. I needed a minute. He nodded. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, I admitted the thing I'd been trying not to think about. I'm scared. I know. What if tonight proves I was never meant to do this? Blake looked at me for a long moment. Then he asked, Do you remember your first rehearsal? I try not to. I do? He smiled softly. You couldn't even introduce yourself. I groaned. Please don't remind me. You walked in convinced you didn't belong here. I did. And now? I looked toward the theater. People were beginning to arrive. Families, couples, groups of friends. The lobby lights glowed through the windows. It feels like home. Blake nodded once. Exactly. He stepped a little closer. So, no matter what happens tonight, his voice was calm. You've already won. I didn't know how to answer that. Because deep down, I knew he was right. The house filled quickly, every seat. People chatted excitedly while flipping through programs. Backstage buzzed with nervous energy. 5 minutes, then 2. The stage manager called, "Places, everyone?" The room fell silent. I took my position behind the curtain. My hands shook, but they weren't shaking as badly as they had that first night. I caught Blake's eye across the stage. He gave me a tiny nod. "Ready?" I nodded back. "Ready." The lights dimmed. The audience applauded. The curtain began to rise. The show flew by. Scenes that had felt endless during rehearsal suddenly disappeared in minutes. The audience laughed, exactly where they were supposed to, sometimes even louder. Every laugh gave me a little more confidence. Then came my biggest scene, the one I dreaded for weeks. I walked into the light, looked at Blake, started speaking. No freezing, no blank mind, no panic. For the first time, I wasn't trying to survive being on stage. I was simply telling the story, and somehow, that made all the difference. When the final scene ended, there was half a second of silence. Then applause exploded through the theater. Loud, long. People stood, a standing ovation. I stared into the crowd, almost unable to believe it. We bowed together, again and again. As the curtain finally closed, the entire cast burst into cheers. People hugged, laughed, some even cried. I stood there overwhelmed. "I can't believe we actually did it." "You did more than that." Blake stepped in front of me. "You looked like you belonged up there." Before I could answer, he reached out and squeezed my shoulder. "I'm proud of you, Franklin." 3 simple words. They hit harder than the applause, harder than the standing ovation, because somehow, the person I wanted to hear them from most had just said them. The applause stayed with me long after the audience had gone home, even after the costumes were hung up, even after the stage lights were turned off. I could still hear it. More than that, I could still hear Blake saying, "I'm proud of you, Franklin." Nobody had ever said those words to me quite like that. Not after I'd done something that scared me. Not after they'd watched me grow from the very beginning. The cast gathered in the lobby for the traditional opening night celebration. There were cookies someone had baked, sparkling cider, way too many selfies. Owen somehow convinced half the cast to recreate one of the funniest scenes from the play for a group photo. "You have to look dramatic," he insisted. "We're holding cupcakes," someone pointed out. "Exactly. Dramatic cupcakes?" The room filled with laughter. I stood off to one side, watching everyone enjoy themselves. "You've got that look again." I smiled without turning around. "I'm starting to think you can read my mind." Blake walked over, 2 paper cups in his hands. "I've had a lot of practice." He handed me one. "What am I thinking now?" "You're wondering if tonight was real." I blinked. "That's actually impressive." He chuckled. "I remember feeling exactly the same after my first opening night." We stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the rest of the cast celebrate. "I almost didn't come to auditions," I admitted. "I know. If I'd turned around in the parking lot, you would have missed a lot." I looked at him. "I would have missed meeting you." The words slipped out before I could stop them. For a second, neither of us spoke. Blake looked down into his cup, then back at me. "I'm really glad you came." The next few performances settled into a comfortable rhythm. Friday night, Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening, Sunday matinee. Every show felt a little different. Some audiences laughed louder, others stayed quieter until the emotional scenes. Each time the curtain rose, my heart still sped up, but it no longer felt like fear. It felt like excitement, something I never thought I'd say. On Sunday afternoon, after the final performance of the weekend, several cast members headed to a nearby park with takeout. Blankets covered the grass. People kicked around a soccer ball. Someone brought a portable speaker. It felt less like coworkers, more like family. I sat beside Blake beneath a large oak tree, while everyone else argued over card games. "You've changed." I looked at him. "Hopefully for the better." He laughed. "I'd say so." "What changed?" "You smile more." I thought about it. Maybe he was right. I think I searched for the words. I spent a long time believing fear got to decide who I was. And now? Now I think it just gets an opinion. Blake smiled. I like that. So do I. Later that afternoon, people slowly started packing up. Cars pulled away one by one until only mine and Blake's remained. Neither of us seemed in much of a hurry to leave. We wandered along the walking path beside the small lake near the park. The sun reflected off the water. Children laughed somewhere in the distance. It was peaceful. I've been thinking about something, Blake said. Uh-oh. Nothing bad. Good. He shoved his hands into his pockets. I wasn't completely honest with you. That caught my attention. What do you mean? He took a slow breath. The first day you came to rehearsal? Yeah? I noticed you before we were introduced. I smiled. I noticed you too. I figured. I thought you looked like someone who knew exactly what he was doing. He laughed. I definitely didn't. You hid it well. There was a short silence. Then he looked straight ahead and quietly admitted, I kept finding reasons to talk to you. My heart skipped. You did? He nodded. The water bottles. The umbrella. Helping backstage. I could have let someone else do those things. He smiled sheepishly. I didn't want to. I stopped walking. So all of that wasn't just you being nice? It was. He looked at me. But it was also because I wanted to get to know you. The air suddenly felt very still. I swallowed. I thought it was only me. What was? Looking forward to rehearsal because you'd be there. For a long second, neither of us moved. Then we both laughed. Not because anything was funny, because the tension we'd both been carrying had finally been spoken out loud. The laughter faded. Neither of us looked away. Franklin. His voice was quieter now. I don't want to assume anything. You don't have to. I just... He hesitated for the first time since I'd known him. I really like spending time with you. I stepped a little closer. I really like spending time with you too. I was hoping you'd say that. So was I. Another silence settled between us. Comfortable. Hopeful. Neither of us rushed it. Blake finally smiled. Would it be okay if I took you to dinner? I laughed softly. I thought we'd already done that. A real one. Oh, I felt my face warm. A date? If you'd like it to be. I didn't need to think. I would. His smile grew wider than I'd ever seen. So, I guess this is me officially asking. And this is me officially saying yes. For the first time since we'd met, neither of us had to wonder anymore. I spent the entire drive home smiling like an idiot. More than once I caught myself grinning at a red light for absolutely no reason. Every time the same thought came back. It's a date, not hanging out, not grabbing dinner. A date. It had taken me weeks to admit to myself that I liked Blake. Apparently it had taken him just as long. Our first date happened the following Thursday. There wasn't a rehearsal that evening, so for the first time since we'd met, we weren't seeing each other because of the theater. That somehow made me more nervous than opening night. I changed shirts 3 times, looked in the mirror far too often, even considered canceling. Then my phone buzzed. Blake, I'm outside. I laughed at myself, grabbed my keys, and headed out. He leaned casually against his truck, wearing a dark green button-up with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. You look nice, he said as soon as he saw me. I felt my face warm. So do you. He smiled. Ready? As I'll ever be. He took me to a small Italian restaurant I'd somehow driven past dozens of times without noticing. It doesn't look like much, he admitted. But they make the best homemade pasta in town. You've already won me over. Inside it was quiet. Soft music. Candles on the tables. Nothing fancy. Just comfortable. Exactly like him. Conversation came surprisingly easily. Without the distraction of rehearsals, we talked about things we'd never really touched on before. Family, childhood, dreams we hadn't accomplished yet. So, Blake asked after our food arrived, what made you afraid of speaking in front of people? I looked down at my fork. I used to get picked to read aloud in school. He waited patiently. I'd stumble over words. A few kids laughed. I know they probably forgot about it 5 minutes later. I shrugged, but I didn't. Blake nodded slowly. It's funny how moments like that stay with us. What about you? He smiled faintly. My dad. I looked up. I thought you said he loved theater. He did, but he expected me to be good immediately. He stirred his drink absent-mindedly. If I messed up building something backstage, he chuckled softly. He'd rebuild it himself before I could learn. He wasn't trying to be cruel. He just thought he was helping. But after a while, you stop believing you can figure things out on your own. I understood that feeling, more than I expected. I'm glad you stayed with theater. He looked at me. I'm glad you joined it. Dinner lasted almost 3 hours. Neither of us noticed. When we finally stepped outside, the evening air was cool. You want to walk for a bit? Blake asked. I'd like that. I'd like. We wandered through the quiet downtown streets, passing small shops that had already closed for the night. String lights hung across the sidewalks. A musician played an acoustic guitar on the corner. The whole town felt slower somehow. Peaceful. I've been thinking, Blake said. That's usually dangerous. It is, I laughed. When this play ends, yeah? I don't want us to lose this. You mean the theater? I mean, he looked at me. Us. I stopped walking. You won't. You sound very certain. I am. He smiled. Good. Over the next 2 weeks, we settled into something wonderfully ordinary. We went for coffee before work, sent each other ridiculous memes throughout the day, tried a hiking trail neither of us had visited before, spent an entire Saturday helping repaint one of the theater's rehearsal rooms, simply because Diane mentioned she could use the extra hands. Owen walked in halfway through and immediately looked between us. So, I sighed. What? I'm. You two are dating now, aren't you? Blake answered first. Yeah. Owen threw both hands into the air dramatically. I knew it! You've been saying that for weeks, I pointed out, because I have eyes. Diane appeared from the hallway. What are we yelling about? They're officially together? She looked at us, then smiled. I was wondering when you'd figure it out. I laughed. Were we really that obvious? Blake groaned. Apparently. Diane patted both of us on the shoulders. I'm happy for you. It was simple, warm, exactly the kind of response I hadn't realized I needed. The final performance arrived sooner than any of us wanted. Backstage felt different that afternoon, more emotional. People took photos in costume, signed one another's scripts, promised to stay in touch. Some people cried before the curtain even opened. You okay? Blake found me standing alone near the wings. I think so. You don't sound convinced. I don't want this to end. He smiled. It doesn't have to. The play does. The play does. He gently nudged my shoulder. But the people don't disappear. I looked around backstage. Owen was making everyone laugh. Diane was giving last-minute notes. Volunteers hurried past carrying props. This place had changed my life. Not because of the stage, because of the people. Most of all, because of Blake. The stage manager called us into position. One last time. I took a deep breath. Not because I was afraid anymore, because I wanted to remember the feeling. The curtain began to rise, and for the first time in my life, walking onto a stage felt exactly like walking home. The final bow lasted longer than any of the others. The audience stood. They clapped until their hands must have hurt. I looked down the line of cast members and realized almost everyone was crying, including Diane. She laughed through her tears as we all took one last bow together. When the curtain finally closed, nobody moved. It was over. Just like that. Weeks of rehearsals, late nights, forgotten lines. Paint-covered weekends, shared coffees, shared umbrellas, everything that had become part of my routine. Finished, or so I thought. Backstage turned into one giant group hug. People exchanged phone numbers, signed programs, promised to come back for the next production. Owen walked over carrying a marker. Script. I handed it to him. He scribbled across the last page before giving it back. I looked down. To Franklin, the guy who showed everyone that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about showing up anyway. I smiled. Thanks. He shrugged. I'm only sentimental once a year. Good. Don't get used to it. One by one, people began leaving. The dressing rooms emptied. The costumes disappeared into storage. The theater slowly became quiet again. I wandered onto the stage one last time. The seats were empty now. The lights had already been turned off, leaving only the soft glow of the work lights overhead. It looked completely different without an audience. Still, it felt special. You disappeared. I turned. Blake walked onto the stage with his hands in his pockets. I wanted one last look. He stood beside me. Together we faced the empty auditorium. It's strange, I admitted. What is? I spent so much time being terrified of standing here. And now? I think I'm going to miss it. He smiled. I had a feeling. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of memories. My disastrous first introduction, our first rehearsal together, the umbrella in the rain, the diner, the open rehearsal, opening night, every little moment that had slowly brought us here. Blake finally broke the silence. You know, hmm? I never told you why I volunteered to help with the new cast. I thought you always did. I usually build sets. So why me? He laughed quietly. I saw you standing outside through the front window. The first day? He nodded. You looked like you were about to leave. I was. I don't know why. He rubbed the back of his neck. But something told me that if you walked away, you'd regret it. I smiled. You were right. I know. I hate how often that's true. He laughed. So do I. As we headed toward the lobby, Diane called after us. There you are. She walked over carrying a small cardboard box. I've got something for you, Franklin. She handed it to me. Inside was the name tag I'd worn on my first rehearsal. The edges were a little bent. The marker had faded slightly. My name was still there. Keep it. I looked up. Really? She nodded. Everyone gets one after their first production. I ran my thumb across the paper. It'll remind you where you started. I swallowed. Thank you. And she smiled knowingly. I expect to see you at auditions next season. I laughed. You really think I'll come back? She looked at Blake, then back at me. I'd be surprised if you didn't. Outside, the night air was cool. The parking lot was almost empty. Only a few cars remained. I leaned against mine while Blake stood beside his truck. Neither of us seemed ready to leave. I've been thinking about something, he said. Should I be worried? No. He reached into his jacket pocket. I actually bought this a few weeks ago. He held out a small envelope. What is it? Open it. Inside were 2 tickets, not for a play, for a professional theater production in the city the following month. I looked back up. You planned this? I was hoping, he smiled, that we'd still be together. I laughed. I think that's a pretty safe bet. I hope so. I slipped the tickets back into the envelope carefully. This is our next date? He nodded. If you want. I definitely want. Before either of us climbed into our cars, Blake reached for my hand. This time, there was no hesitation, no wondering, no guessing what the other person felt. Our fingers intertwined naturally, comfortably, like we'd been doing it for years. You know, I said, it's kind of funny. What is? I joined this theater because someone needed an extra person. And I thought the biggest thing I'd gain was maybe a little confidence. Blake smiled. What did you actually gain? I looked around one last time, at the old brick building, the stage hidden behind its walls, the place that had scared me more than anything else. Then I looked back at him. A place where I belong. I squeezed his hand gently. And someone I want to keep sharing it with. His smile answered before his words did. I was hoping you'd say that. He leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't dramatic. Just warm, gentle, certain. When we pulled back, I couldn't stop smiling. So, Blake asked, you ready for the next adventure? I glanced toward the theater one last time before looking back at him. Months earlier, I'd stood outside those same doors convinced fear would always control my life. Now I understood something completely different. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing to walk through the door anyway. And sometimes, the door you were most afraid to open became the one that led you exactly where you were meant to be.